this is the history of music from the 1940s to the 2000s. In the 1940s were heavily dominated by World War II, greatly influenced the music that was played. The main style of music that was played in the 1940s was big band, swing and jazz. There are many people that played this music, but some of the most prominent were the Anderson sisters, Benny Goodman and Duke Ellington. The 1940s was full of different influential jazz musicians that shaped jazz as we know it today. With their experimental or radical compositions. This started off with the tune Take the A Train by Duke Ellington in 1941. This was an experimental tune because it used the whole tone scale, which is very uncommon before. Also it used big band, he included big band, which included drums, bass, piano, guitar, and many horns, which was very common at the time. Moving to 1942, we have the tune Sea Jam Blues, also written by Duke Ellington. This was radical because the melody only contained two notes, C and G, leaving a lot of room for interpretation, improvisation, and giving each musician a solo. Further, 1945, the tune Billy's Bounce by Charlie Parker, also known as Bird. Charlie Parker was one of the pioneering bebop musicians of his time, which involved extremely fast solos of speed up to 300 BPM. Furthermore, bebop uses a technique called phrasing in a way that's entirely new. 1946 came the tune Yardbird Suit, also by Charlie Parker. This tune furthermore shows his skill in the world of bebop and has become an anthem for bebop players around the world today. Next is the bugle player Dizzy Gillespie with his tune Manteca in 1947. This was one of the first Latin funk jazz with intricate rhythms for percussion and a funk style on the bass. He also incorporates the style of bebop in all his solos. Big band, very popular style in the day, Big band was a very popular style of music that became very common and a type of dance music in the 1940s. This included Benny Goodman with Sing Sing Sing, the Anderson sisters with the Boogie Boogie Bugle Boy, and Fred Astaire with Putting on the Ritz. This type of music usually involved drums, bass, and a lot of wind instruments to help get the big brass, sharp sound of a big band.
You're missing out the 50s.
Yeah, Benita.
Oh, she did 50.
And 2010.
Have you got the slideshow there though? Could you cover that?
We did it all separately and stuff. So I wrote one down on paper, I'm old school.
The 70s consisted of predominantly four main genres, rock, disco, punk and funk. The 70s created a good bridge between the rebelliousness of the 60s and the happier songs usually characteristic of the 80s. Many became tired of the conflict that occurred in the previous decade, and because of this, the disco movement emerged. And the idea of singing at the ills of society fell on punk, particularly in the later part of the decade with bands such as the Sex Pistols, Misfits and the UK Subs. Punk had a much harder and upbeat sound and style, therefore it was more suited to these kinds of tracks. Probably the most famous example of the social unrest caused by punk music was God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols. The song expresses a distaste for the British monarchy and says that the Queen, quote, ain't no human being, and refers to the monarchy as a fascist regime. This expression caused an uproar of the nation, which at the time was expected, the nation was expected to respect the royal family. In 1977, the Sex Pistols boarded a boat down the Thames and played a gig, including the song God Save the Queen. And they displayed a banner which said Queen Elizabeth, a new single by the Sex Pistols, God Save the Queen, which led to them picking up various police boats periodically and eventually the arrests of various people on board. God Save the Queen was subsequently banned by the BBC. New wave, similar to punk music but more radio friendly with an electronic flair, also emerged in the late 70s and went on to become a predominant genre in the next decade. Progressive rock was another big genre in the 70s, often seen as the defining genre, with bands such as Queen taking the genre to new heights and pushing the boundaries and limitations of the time. This consisted of rock music often fused with other genres. Two famous examples of this are Another One Bites the Dust, which is rock and disco, and Bohemian Rhapsody, which consists of an a cappella, ballad, opera and rock song all in one. Songs of this genre were often longer and bands tended to be more spontaneous and experimental while they were playing live. Many progressive rock albums were also concept albums, meaning that they followed a theme throughout the entire album or series of albums. The most notable concept album at the time being The Wall by Pink Floyd. Another popular band at this time was Kansas, an American progressive rock band which used an extremely wide range of instrumentation, from percussion to keyboards of all different kinds. One of their most popular tracks, Carry On Wayward Son, is a perfect example of how the 70s were extremely experimental and didn't follow the simple 3-minute verse-chorus radio structure that had been commonplace for decades before. And finally, funk music came out of the R&B, jazz and soul music of the late 60s after artists added more beats and psychedelic tones to their songs. This genre encompassed the 70s with artists like James Brown and Parliament Funkadelic. James Brown is often thought as the creator of funk, and he was responsible for some of the first mainstream funk songs, such as I Feel Good. In the middle of the 70s, many artists, including James Brown and the group Earth, Wind & Fire, added some elements of popular disco music to their funk albums and saw even greater mass appeal.
Thank you very much, Taylor.
Right.
Alright, I'm going to put this, you got your book. I made a playlist to give you examples of
Great.
so I should say that on. Where's your book? Is that there? My music course, 3.5mm or oh shit, I'm going to find it. It's alright, it's alright. So, is it working?
Morning sun.
Yeah, I've got the 80s here. The 80s was the birth and evolution of many modern styles of music. Pop music is dominated by the synthesizer. Can you shut up, please? With many artists from different genres incorporating it into their music. Including Simple Minds, Adam Ant, Whitney Houston, Billy Ocean, and Kenny Loggins. The Yamaha DX7 was really affordable, so yeah, it was the first one that came out and all people could afford, so that's pretty much why that happened. The new romantic movement includes bullshit like this. Was what was it? It was kind of synth-led pop. Featured depressing lyrics and vocals with electronic drums and that. Keyboards. Men often wore makeup and women's clothes with lots of black and silk clothes as well. New Order, Boy George, Dead or Alive and Cure are all prime examples. Luckily this trend all but died out by the time the 90s came around. The legacy left by 70s punk though led to the realisation that you didn't need any formal music training to start a band. And as a result, many underground genres and scenes came into prominence. Right. This one. Hardcore punk. I've gone overboard with the hardcore in this, but do you want to hear it anyway?
Let's go.
Alright. Hardcore punk, commonly abbreviated to just hardcore, is one of these genres. Thank you, Aaron. It's kept doing itself of traditional punk, but was heavier and more abrasive sounding. The tempo is often extremely fast, and to slow down suddenly to what is known as a breakdown or a beatdown. Led for dancing violently. The guitars are distorted heavily and use simple power chords, often playing discordant, dissonant melodies. The vocals were screaming and shouting rather than sung, and lyrics focused on politics, social change, day-to-day life and gang violence, especially in the New York hardcore scene. Over on the West Coast, a band called Minor Threat started the straight edge movement, which rejected the excess and hedonism promoted by punk and glam metal bands like Motley Crue and the yuppie subculture. The straight edge crew didn't drink alcohol, smoke or do drugs and were usually vegetarian or vegan and promoted staying healthy and violently opposing racism and sexism. Straight edge is still a big part of the hardcore scene. I've really gone off with this one. Straight edge is still a large part of the hardcore scene today. Another way in which hardcore differed from punk was the clothes. Fashion before fashion was and still is the basis of hardcore. So the flamboyant hairy outfits of punk were rejected in favour of simple jeans and t-shirts and trainers with shaved heads. Discharge, Agnostic Front, Minor Threat and Black Flag are all examples of 80s hardcore. The 80s also saw the rise of hip-hop. So I put on that one, hold on. I've heard some before, I don't know what, but I'm down with the kids. I know. So anyway, he's got me on film being called Peter. Where was I? Huge place as well. Alright, the 80s also saw the rise of hip-hop into mainstream culture, with samples widely available and affordable, hundreds of new artists emerged. This led to the era becoming known as the golden age of hip-hop. And it actually was, you were wrong, you obviously Google said it was the 90s. Lyrics became grittier and more political as a response to President Reagan's conservative politics, and and the so-called war on drugs that disproportionately affected young black men. Public Enemy and NWA was at the forefront of this, rapping about their own experiences of racism and police brutality. Probably the most famous example of this was the NWA song Fuck the Police in 1988, which is on now, which caused controversy across America and led to the group having shows cancelling public protests, at which CDs and merchandise were burned and even the arrest of band members. As a whole, the 80s was defined by rebellion and change, and this was reflected by the music of the era. It also saw the rise of hip-hop, which would go on to be the world's most popular genre in the 90s and beyond, which Ellie will probably tell you about now. Am I right?
Yeah.
7 check. When you read the second check. Okay. I felt like I should walk up after speaking now. Every now and then.
The 90s was a key time in music history, as we witnessed a modern outlook on the way music was set out. Teen pop and dance pop trends, which started in the 70s and 80s, were still very popular throughout the whole of the 90s. Hip-hop grew and started to become even more popular than it already was, continuing this genre's golden age, which started in the mid-80s and carried on throughout the 90s. Electronic music was started in the 80s, grew even more popular in the 90s, and house and techno, also from the 80s, had international success, as well as the new electronic dance music like rave and drum and bass. In 2010, there was a survey where 11,000 Europeans voted the 1990s as the second best era for music in the last 50 years. Similarly to the 80s, rock music continued to be popular. Unlike glam metal and new wave, which were already popular, new types of rock started to emerge, like grunge, alternative rock, Britpop, and industrial rock, and they all started to gain more popularity. In the 2000s, in American culture, a lot of popular music trends that were in the 90s carried on throughout the majority of the 2000s. Contemporary R&B was one of the most popular genres of this decade, especially in the early to mid-2000s. In 2004, the Billboard End-of-Year Hot 100 had 15 of its top 25 hits, all as contemporary R&B songs. Hip-hop achieved mainstream status after the 90s and the deaths of some of the most prominent artists in the genre, such as Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. Despite hip-hop and R&B pretty much taking over 2000s, I spelled that wrong, rock and roll was still pretty popular, especially post-grunge, pop-punk and post-hardcore. Despite a slip in the beginning of the decade, country was still able to find success towards the end. By 2010, a mix of hip-hop and electronic dance music was also very successful. The end of the 2000s also marked a point where European and where European and American music became more popular in Asia and Far Eastern countries.
Thank you. Is that a lot?
Yeah.
Good, well done guys, some really good informative stuff. My top tip of the day will be to let's get all this on one slideshow. All of your notes, everything, so it's there in one place. Thank you people.